Welcome to CA UIM 8.4 New Features. In this video, we'll take a look at the new alarm notification feature in the UIM mobile app, and how to configure the app to receive alarms, even when the app is not running. We'll first take a look at the new functionality, and how to configure the application. Then, take an up-close look at how it works, and finally, talk about helpful troubleshooting tips.
In the past, when alarms were coming in from the UIM server, you could see what those alarms were inside of the UIM app. And so here's a screenshot of that. What was requested was the ability to have those notifications come to the OS's screen. So if the app isn't running, those notifications can continue to come in so that you can be made aware of them. So that is a major capability that's been added. The 8.4 release of the mobile app is currently or is already available on both the Google Play Store and on the Apple App Store, so those can be downloaded right now. One thing worth noting is that all my screenshots here are iOS-based, but the Android app looks very similar, does very much the same thing, with the differences just in terms of the way that Android is structured. So you'll see these capabilities on both of those apps. This is how that is now configured. When you go in and you are at the login screen that you can see on the left, what you'll see is that there's now a notification section at login, and that notification section allows you to choose what level of notification you want the server to notify the mobile device of. So it will be that level and higher. So if you choose information, you're going to get warning, minor, major, and critical. Whatever you choose, you're going to get those and the more critical warnings. Now, one word of warning: if you set that notification level to something like information and you're on a busy system, you're going to get a lot of notifications. So our expectation is that most people are probably only going to want notifications for major or critical. But if there is need, it is possible to set that much lower. One other thing worth noting, this is also the place where that is disabled. So if you have notifications turned on, whether the app is running or not, notifications will be flowing into the mobile device. If that needs to be turned off, effectively you have to log in again using the mobile app and set this to off at that login. So that's the method for toggling that on and off. Do note that this app is backwards compatible with previous versions of the UIM server prior to 8.4. However, notifications obviously cannot work because the server doesn't have the capability to be talking to either Google or to the Apple notification service in order to send that. So the 8.4 app, backwards compatible, but in order to take advantage of this, you need to have UIM 8.4 installed on the server or something later than that. The mobile OS has the ability typically to go in and select what apps can send notifications. That needs to be enabled as well. Now, when you first install this, that permission dialog that usually comes up when you install a new app says, do you want to be able to allow notifications from this specific app? You have to say yes there, or obviously those aren't going to flow through. That said, that has been one of the things that often people have gone in and turned off and forget about it. So sometimes we're troubleshooting why notifications aren't flowing, and ultimately it's just because the app is disabled. So that's kind of the number one troubleshooting tip, is just make sure that the phone is allowing notifications. In terms of actually utilizing this, once the notifications start flowing, it's just a matter then of swiping or selecting the notification depending on the OS, and it will bring up the app, started if it needs to, running in context, and show the alarm that was selected. So it makes it very easy to navigate directly there. The one thing worth noting is that obviously if the app isn't running, it can't bring that up without requiring you to log in again. So if the app is in the background, it comes in directly in context. If the app isn't even alive, when that notification comes in, when you swipe, you'll be asked to log in, and then it will show it in context. So that's the one difference between whether you're logged in within the background or whether the app is actually not running. So the one thing that I think is important for the standpoint of troubleshooting is to just generally understand a little bit about how these services work. This is very similar on both iOS and on Android in terms of the way those services work. So I wanted to explain that, because from a troubleshooting standpoint, there are more moving parts here, and we're dependent on things that are outside of CA's control. So first of all, you install the app, obviously, on the left-hand side, and then that app, if it's given permission, or when you select what level of alarm you want, the app registers for push notifications with the OS on the mobile device. At that point, the OS asks the notification service, and these are obviously run by either Apple or Google, for a device token to be able to say, okay, look, I'm this app, and I want to be able to receive on my phone that I'm hosted on to receive notifications. At that point, the app gets a device token from that service that uniquely identifies that phone. Now note here at this point, the server doesn't have awareness of this. If you follow this flow, this is a good way that they're ensuring that the person who's asking for those notifications is the only one that can get it. It adds to the security. So now the UIM 8.4 app is aware of this token that has been registered with the service. It now sends it to the UIM server. UIM server now records that off in a table to be able to look up later. When a notification is pending, as it's watching the alarms flow through, it notices one that is relevant to the user, one of these registered users. It sends a notification to either Apple's or Google's service, which then sends it directly to the phone. So that's the general flow in terms of how everything works. So the important thing worth noting is that there's some networking that's going on here that is not involved directly within the UIM server, and I'll talk about that a little in the troubleshooting about how the firewall needs to be configured in order to allow these to flow. So the troubleshooting tips, as it is dependent on NAS 473 or above. That is, of course, what is already included with UIM 8.4, but if there's any modifications made, that is required. And then obviously the mobile portlet itself needs to be 8.4 or later. We expect obviously to propagate this into future versions. Speaking of that firewall problem, the firewall has to allow the UIM server to communicate with either the Apple or the Google notification server. So in this case, Apple, those are the ports and URLs that are necessary, or server names that are necessary in order to allow traffic to flow to those servers. And then that's the one for Android. The Android one is just going over HTTPS, and so that's likely open, but if there are any problems, that's one place that could be blocked. Now note, this is talking about the server's communication to Apple or Google's servers for sending those notifications. The expectation is that the phone, if it's on a carrier's network, is already able to get notifications. Obviously, that's just a standard part of the way that the phone would be set up with the carrier. If it's running inside on Wi-Fi, there might be changes, but typically the carriers are obviously allowing notifications to propagate, and if you're getting notifications for any app, those ports are already open properly. So then, as I mentioned earlier, the number one tip about making sure the settings on the mobile device are allowing the UIM app notifications. In Apple or in Android, there are settings that need to be enabled. If there's debugging that needs to happen, we have to go in and make a modification to the file that's listed there, the portal log 4jext.xml. And the lines that need to be added are those three that are shown there in Courier. That will allow it to all be logged so you can watch the transaction occur and validate that things are flowing as they should. Note that WASP, of course, needs to be restarted. One other thing, that ultimately that table that's being updated that I spoke to earlier is written to the device XML file. And what that's doing is correlating, a device with the level of notifications that it's expecting and to the specific ID that's been provided by either Apple or Google. That's just a really good method for being able to validate that indeed when the mobile device requested to register for notifications, that ultimately the service was all set up correctly and that the UIM server will be able to send it notifications. And the one last thing I just wanted to note is just that ultimately this whole stack collapses in the opposite order of what I talked about when I showed that diagram. So if you go in and you turn notifications off, everything gets unregistered throughout that entire stack. So Apple and Google know to no longer be sending notifications, and the server is also made aware of that, so it's no longer sending them. So that should toggle it on in exactly the opposite way that it toggles it off. As I mentioned earlier, this is available now and ready for download on the Apple or Google Play Store.
For more detailed information about how to use the UIM mobile app, refer to the documentation wiki, or visit the UIM community to join in the discussion. The links can also be found in the YouTube description located below this video.